So prior to the cotton gin, America's most substantial agricultural products were tobacco. You had some rice, you had wheat, you did have sugar, you had other things. And then the cotton gin revolutionized the way that cotton could be harvested by removing the seeds at a far more efficient clip. That, in combination with some other things happening with some of the other agricultural markets, really led to a growth in cotton. First, starting with tobacco. So, tobacco, uh, since our colonial days, had been a lucrative trade, and Europe had a thirsty demand for it. They like to smoke it. Okay, all kinds of different things you can do with it. However, tobacco prices were very susceptible to uh, unstable pricing, frequent economic depressions, and tobacco as an agricultural product is very exhaustive of land. It is very taxing on the land that it grows. And so a lot of farmers started to grow other crops along with tobacco to kind of circumvent that. But tobacco being so rough, a lot of farmers were looking for an alternative. So tobacco is losing a little bit of its luster, if you will, by the 1830s or so. And then you look at other other forms of crops like rice, for example. For rice, you need quite a substantial amount of irrigated land. So if you've ever seen a rice paddy or anything else of the sort, various land has to be flooded. Um, it's great if you have an extensive season where you might have access to land, like a growing season in places like Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, especially as you have tidal waters along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, places like that. Okay, but you just need a lot of water, substantial irrigation, and it could take about 9 months for it to grow, too. Gosh, that's a lot. Okay, so sugar, another staple crop. Boy, that is very physically intensive. So, sugar is only grown in parts of the South, like Louisiana, for example, where you have a more humid climate that's conducive to growing sugar. Gosh, you're going to have brutal heat. You're going to have very physically taxing work to harvest the sugar, plant it, harvest it. It's going to be a lot. So when you're in intense heat with extremely arduous physical labor, that's going to be a recipe for a lot of physical issues. And quite a number of slave labor or slaves that worked uh, sugarcane, not just in America, but also in the Caribbean, a lot of them died from exhaustion. Um, those who worked in sugar had a very high mortality rate. So, tobacco, very demanding on the land that it's grown, and it's susceptible to price fluctuations and economic conditions. Rice takes a long time, you need a lot of water and warmth. And then sugar, physically brutal. It's very brutal. So there had to have been something else based upon limitations of rice and the sugar and tobacco. That's where the cotton gin comes back into play because now you're removing seeds. You can maximize the efficiency by about 50 times. Well, one of two different things is going to happen within that. Either you're going to keep the same amount of labor and just produce a little bit more, or the other thing's going to happen. You realize, oh boy, we can make all kinds of money if only we just had more land, and we can totally expand this cotton output in our country. So no longer are we going to have to rely on rice or sugar or tobacco. Now we've got cotton and I've got labor to do it. Now I'm going to have access to lands because we removed all those Native Americans, right? Okay. So in the American South, now you're going to have a far more expansive cotton output. Even though it's more efficient, you're just going to take up more land because you're going to grow a lot more of it. And as you're growing a lot more of it, you're going to need a lot more labor, i.e., slave labor. Well, hold that thought. Short staple cotton was the product of choice. Short staple cotton makes up the vast majority of the cotton that you see in America today. Denim jeans, flannel, most of your t-shirts, anything along those lines, most of that is made from your standard short staple American cotton. Great. Okay. It is easy to harvest. It can grow in a variety of climates and soils. It's not as exhaustive. And so short staple cotton is seen as the product du jour because, wow, it's efficient, can grow it all the time, and it's in abundant need. The other form of cotton, long staple cotton, takes a bit. It's a more tedious process to grow long staple cotton. Long staple cotton is typically has a longer fiber, and it can be woven into things like your standard bed sheets, maybe your finer towels, some of your softer cotton, that sort of a thing. That's typically long staple cotton. It's a little bit more of an arduous product. So most of the cotton grown in the United States back then and currently is not long staple cotton. It's short staple cotton. Okay, so because you have cotton output and you also have a rise in the textile industry where you have all those mills where you can put things all together under one roof, you have a demand for cotton that increases because your textiles are also growing. You have product, you have labor up north who can put it all together. Okay, now let's see farmers start moving into uncultivated lands to start growing cotton. And by the 1820s, most of the states that had predominantly been tobacco, they had been rice or sugar or anything, started to transition. And then you have people, farmers who lived in those states, who now started moving west. They started moving to Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and even parts of Georgia. Eventually, they'd move into Texas. That's a whole different story. Hold that thought. Okay? So, by the 1860s, the United States was producing about 3 billion bales of cotton. That's about $200 million a year, and that's 1860 money. That's a lot. That's a massive industry. So, because cotton is efficient, it's abundant, you have land, you have labor, it can be grown year round, it's awesome. People are going to make a killing with cotton, literally and figuratively. Otherwise, though, the South becomes the cotton kingdom. And you can see on slide number 2 just kind of where cotton shifts over the course of a few years. So you can see if you go to slide number 2, you'll be able to see migration of slavery because of the need for cotton. You can see in the 1820s, slavery, you have large pockets of it in South Carolina and Georgia and a few here and there spread throughout the South. By the 1860s, you can see, oh boy, as that green in that area, cotton has become more and more cultivated. You can see a migration of slaves in those goldish brownish type areas right there, moving further and further westward. Earlier on, we talked about the Middle Passage, about how African slaves were taken from Africa on slave ships to the Americas for slave trade. In essence, because you have a westward migration of slaves due to cotton labor, you in essence have another version of Middle Passage. In this case, it would be a second Middle Passage. You have a significant number of slaves from the Carolinas and Georgia moving out towards Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, eventually making its way into Texas. And that changes slave culture within that. But otherwise, though, it is all basically based around cotton. So the Deep South, as we refer to it now, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the slave population increased by over 1 million from 1820 to 1860 because of this westward migration, that middle passage due to the Cotton Kingdom. So you have a significant shift in American population, not just for farmers, but also for slaves, all because cotton is king.